Hi, and welcome to Check Your Thread, a podcast about sewing more sustainably. My name's Zoe, and I'm obsessed with sewing. I've been blogging about it for over 13 years and am the creator and host of the popular handmade wardrobe challenge, Me Made May. But like many people, I've become increasingly concerned about the climate crisis and the way my lifestyle contributes to it. So in this podcast, I'll be nerding out about making clothes whilst exploring how to minimise the negative impact that it may have. I really hope you'll join me on this journey. Hello, lovely listeners. How are you? I hope life is treating you well. I'm good. It's been the half-term break, so my kids and my husband, who's a teacher, have been home. We've not done an awful lot, but we've managed to have some nice times, and I've got a couple of recordings done for future podcast episodes as well. So have you been doing much making recently? I've been working on a pair of ginger jeans for myself. I'm using some very stretchy denim with a tiny leopard print on it that I've had in my stash for at least a year. It was a remnant because there was a fade mark along the length of the fabric where it had been folded on the bolt, but it's been really easy to cut around. So this is my third pair of ginger jeans. My first version was the low rise, and then my second version was a medium rise. And for this one, I'm making the high rise view. So honestly, I think that I prefer the look of low rise jeans, but what I really want is a pair of jeans that stay up and feel comfortable. And I think for me, that might mean that a high-waisted pair is going to work better. So I'm actually experimenting also with a small full tummy adjustment that will hopefully give them a little bit extra fullness where I need them in the tum. I previously did a full tummy adjustment on the Lander pants pattern, and that worked really well. I'm not entirely sure how it's going to work in very stretchy fabric, but I think it's going to work out okay. I watched a couple of tutorials to remind myself about the adjustment, but in the end I just kind of eyeballed it, and I didn't add as much extra to the centre front as I did for the Landers to allow for that additional stretch. I'll obviously report back. Oh, and if you follow my regular Sozo blog feed on Instagram, you may have seen in my stories that my sewing area has had a welcome transformation recently. So as I've mentioned before, my sewing area is also our dining area, which is also visible from and connected to our lounge area. My family have always been incredibly accepting of my sewing stuff being strewn all over the place in our kind of living area. But the volume of stuff and lack of proper storage was getting ridiculous, and it was just looking so messy. I've been looking for almost a year for like a second-hand bookshelf or second-hand wardrobe or something that I could use. Maybe that would require a bit of upcycling possibly, but just nothing has come up that was suitable. So in the end, we ordered a new larder cupboard from May.com, and it came and it looks so nice, and I'm so happy with it. It now contains so much of the stuff that was previously on show, and it looks so good, and I'm really happy. And I no longer feel guilty about basically making everyone live in my sewing devastation, and it all looks all nice and tidy and grown up in there now. Sustainability stuff, honestly, no damn progress has been made in any direction this week. I think you have some weeks where you're kind of making great leaps and strides in the right direction, and you have others where you're just kind of treading water, and that's definitely been this kind of week for me. Oh, and plus I've found that there is a rat living in my compost bin. I almost didn't want to mention it because I don't want to put anyone off from composting. Personally, it doesn't really bother me that much that there's a rat living in the compost bin at the moment, but I really don't particularly want it there in the summer when we're going to be in the garden more often and the kids are going to want to play in the garden and stuff. So I've got to figure out how to deal with that little guy. So there's that. Any tips? Very welcome. Right, so this week I want to say a huge big thanks to listeners Gabby, Katrin and Katie. They have signed up this week to give the podcast monthly support via Patreon. Thank you ever so much. If you're interested in signing up to support the podcast, please remember you can contribute any amount that you wish or feel you are able to. More details are in the show notes or on the website checkyourthread.com. So today's episode is the third and final instalment of my mini-series about the Make, Do and Mend campaign. There's been some great feedback via Instagram on the previous two. Last week I posted some photos of my grandparents and ruminated on their experience of life in World War II. And I invited others to contribute memories that their older family members had shared about that time. And there were some fascinating stories, so thank you so much for the people who shared. If you have something you'd like to share, it's never too late, so please head over to @checkyourthread.com on Instagram and pick one of the Make, Do and Mend related posts to add your comment to. It's been so enjoyable for me to dig into this topic. I've been really enjoying learning about life from previous generations, as well as sharing my thoughts on the parallels between then and now, and the lessons that we can learn. So in this episode, we pick up where we left off from last week's and discuss another 3 themes or topics from the make, do and mend era that I think resonate with today. And for the second half of this episode, we'll leave the big picture ideas to zoom right in on the topic. I share some of the practical tips and advice that I found in the reproductions of the leaflets produced by the government as part of the Make, Do and Mend campaign. I've split them into 3 sections: mending tips, garment care, and stains and laundry advice. So much of what was shared then is surprisingly relevant and useful for today's garments and lifestyles. So I really hope that you've enjoyed looking at this topic from the various angles that I've tried to approach it from. I would, as always, love to hear your own thoughts and takeaways from the topic, so please get in touch via email or Instagram. Okay, enjoy! Let's continue with the next 3 themes from the Make, Do and Mend campaign that have a lot of relevance today or maybe in the future. Something that came up that I predict will be increasingly explored going forwards is locally produced fabric. The Second World War saw shortages of imported materials due to blockades, including fibres grown overseas such as cotton. I couldn't find any information directly related to this, but I'm guessing that locally produced textiles subsequently would have been in higher demand than ever before. So many aspects of most fabric production today are incredibly unsustainable, particularly in relation to the sheer quantity of fabric that is being produced. It was estimated that 400 billion square metres of fabric was produced globally in 2015 for clothing. The amount of damage caused to the environment, ecosystems, workers and local populations has earned it the title of one of the most harmful industries on the planet. However, there are a lot of people reimagining the fashion and textiles industries and thinking how to implement and shape its degrowth. Fashion Act Now, a collective of fashion industry insiders and thinkers born out of Extinction Rebellion, for example, are demanding what they term as a radical defashion future. It is unclear exactly what that's meant to look like, but there seems to be a lot of talk about looking to more localised sources of fibre and fabric production. And the whole fibre shed movement is dedicated to developing regional fibre systems. And from what I can tell, none of these endeavours have reached the point where locally produced fabric made from locally produced fibres is available to buy for home sewers, but if you've heard of any, please let me know. I do think that this is an area that will see a lot of development in the future, so maybe research and connect with your local fibre shed group and see what's up. Planning new additions to your wardrobe. So the clothing rationing scheme that ran from 1941 to 1949 meant that most people had to put great amounts of thought into what garments they really needed and therefore what new items would be best to spend precious coupons as well as money on. It must have taken considerable planning and looking to the needs of the future seasons to make sure that an entire household was adequately clothed throughout the year. Today in the West, with so much mass-produced clothing available for rock-bottom prices and a culture that promotes and encourages rabid consuming, we are experiencing a level of overconsumption that is truly unsustainable. Even those of us who sew our own clothes, who understand the complexity of garment construction and who often pay more for a length of fabric than a ready-made garment would cost, can find ourselves not planning our makes very well and ending up with self-made items that we never wear. We may make our own clothes, but most of us are still children of that consumerist culture, so we have those habits ingrained and it can be hard to acknowledge them and choose a different approach. But because of the environmental and social impact of fabric production and a garment's eventual disposal, it's kind of our responsibility to give a lot of thought into what we decide to make, particularly if we are using new fabric. The goal must be for most of our garments to have a long and useful life, for them to see lots of wear before we eventually pass them on or dispose of them. There will always be exceptions, such as garments for special occasions or highly seasonal items, but generally, planning out our project with care so that they fit our bodies, personal tastes and lifestyles has more likelihood of them getting years of regular wear rather than languishing in our wardrobes. Right, mending and garment care. Somewhere in the intervening decades between the 1940s and now, it sometimes seems that we have collectively forgotten that garments can and should be mended. We all need to be reminded that if something is worth buying or making, then it's worth repairing and caring for correctly. Even those of us who sew need to be reminded of this from time to time, and I completely include myself in this. It's so easy for our attention to get whisked away in the frenzy of a new project, and we forget that we must give time and energy to help our existing garments have a long and fruitful life. During the Second World War, regular people really understood the value of good quality materials and fabric that had inbuilt longevity. It helped their clothing rations go further because quality garments required replacing less frequently and more time would pass before mending and repairing needed to take place. Of course, since that time, much of the clothing industry has deprioritised good quality materials and manufacturing methods. And as consumers, we have subsequently been trained to disregard longevity in clothing in favour of the new and on-trend. But everybody can retrain their brains into valuing our garments more highly. And as home sewers, we have a head start on this because we have a clearer appreciation of the labour that goes into garments, whether it was our own labour or other people's. Home sewers are also in a better position to act upon this because we already have the tools and skills to repair garments when they need it. There are heaps of resources available on how to approach repairs and to teach us necessary skills. Books, YouTube videos and mending hashtags are all great places to start for ideas, inspiration and know-how. Check out episode 22 with Carla and Meg from Community Glue Workshops to get yourself in the mending mood. Plus, listen out for an episode with a mending legend that's coming in the near future for another dose of mending inspiration. Garment care is a slightly different set of skills and knowledge and something that I'm going to cover directly on the podcast soon also. So now we've covered the general ideas and themes of make, do and mend as I see them that can inform our actions going forward, let's zoom right into the topic. While spending ages looking at many of the reproductions of the Make, Do and Mend official leaflets, I found a whole heap of practical, applicable tips that we could all do with knowing today, and I thought I'd pass some of them on. Before I started to look through them again for this mini-series, I expected that a lot of the advice would be completely out of date and irrelevant for the kinds of clothes and fibres and fabrics that we wear today. But aside from the odd section about caring for corsets, which apparently some people still wore in the 1940s, and weird items like rubber aprons, there was a surprising amount that I felt is applicable to the wardrobes and lifestyles of nowadays. So I read through these books for ideas when I was writing the garment care section of my own book, Mend It, Wear It, Love It. But there were things that I picked up on this time round that I didn't recall from my previous research. I also thought it was going to be horrendously sexist and overly gendered, but I didn't find it too bad. The information was generally presented in a very direct and practical manner and not as patronising as I feared. So let's get into the knowledge bombs. Here's some tips and advice that I found that I feel would be relevant for most people today. I've split them up into 3 sections: mending tips, garment care and laundering. Okay, mending tips. To be honest, sometimes I think that all the visible mending hashtags and so on, with all their incredible examples of beautiful mends, can make it seem a bit unobtainable. But honestly, anyone in possession of a needle and thread has the ability to perform a successful mend and extend the life of a garment. So here's some tips that can help us approach garment mending and repairs. Okay, always carry a needle and thread with you. Plus a couple of safety pins, I reckon. It doesn't have to be a large kit, just a few items in a little pot or tin, perhaps one of those little hotel sewing kits for on-the-spot repairs. It might at least stop something getting really bad before you have the chance to take the items home and properly deal with the situation. It also means that you're more likely to be able to help others who are in a bit of a garment malfunction fix. Always mend clothes before washing them. The only time that this can be ignored is if you're giving the garment to someone else to repair. In those instances, laundering beforehand is an act of courtesy. But say you're handling this business yourself. Mend first, then wash if needed. Otherwise, the agitation of the garment being laundered might make the holes or tears worse, or even unmanageable. Places where the fabric is thin may develop holes during washing, so reinforce them first because prevention is always better than cure. A link to this: take things out of your wardrobe at the first sign of damage in case you're tempted to keep wearing it before you can find time to fix it. I find that this can also act as a motivator to address it, so you can get the garment back into rotation. When garments eventually die and are beyond repair, remove anything useful like buttons, zips, hooks and eyes, hanging loops and sections of undamaged fabric, and keep them in your mending kit, because all of those can be used to replace missing parts or repair damaged sections of other garments. Okay, here's a little subsection on preventative measures that will stave off damage and therefore make mending less likely. Reinforce thin spots on the inside of the garment. So I'm thinking of like the inside thigh area of jeans, for example. It's recommended to use a fabric that is strong but lighter in weight than the original fabric to do this. Consider adding a patch to the inside of a trouser cuff at the back of where your trousers or jeans rub against your footwear. Also consider adding elbow patches to jackets or knitwear straight away, as those areas will inevitably get worn over time. As home sewers, we can do this easily when making a garment and have some fun using cute shapes or contrast fabrics. So consider doing this to the knees of kids' trousers, joggers or leggings also. It's much easier to add a knee patch before the legs have been sewn into a tube, so consider adding them in during the construction. For cyclists, reinforce the knees and seat of your trousers before they blow out. Okay, next section, garment care. The tips about garment care are all geared towards keeping clothes in the best possible condition for as long as possible. Some of these points might sound obvious, but I'm pretty sure that we're all guilty of not doing a number of these. I know that I am. Okay, first, change into old clothes as soon as you get home, then give the clothes you've just taken off an airing, i.e., don't immediately put them in the wardrobe, or on the chair drobe if you're former guest Rebecca Evans-Merritt. Airing out your clothes means that they'll be less likely to smell musty the next time you go to wear it, and therefore you'll be less likely to chuck it in the wash to freshen it up when it's not actually dirty, which saves on the unnecessary wearing out of your clothes through the laundry process and the fuel and water required for laundering. Personally, I almost always change into old leggings and a sweatshirt or something similar in the evenings when I'm home, usually before I start cooking dinner. Honestly, it's because I just want to feel as comfortable as possible. But I can also see that there are real benefits to limiting the amount of time spent in your good clothes and reducing the amount of cooking smells and splashes that they may otherwise be subject to. If possible, air the clothes you've just worn in the sunshine. So sunlight actually has antibacterial qualities, once again making odours and insect-related damage less likely. More on that in a bit. When you take your clothes off, don't throw them in a heap, hang them up. Use the correct size or shape of hanger for the garment and use the hanging loops if present. If it's a coat or jacket, make sure that the hanger is broad enough to extend properly into the shoulders of the garment. And do up fastenings to help garments keep their shape when they're being hung, particularly the top button of a garment, even if you don't actually wear the garment fully buttoned up. Gravity can do a lot of damage if you let it. Never store clothes somewhere damp in case of mildew. I learned elsewhere that keeping wardrobes or cupboards a bit away from the wall can help with this, and nowadays there are heaps of products from full-on dehumidifiers to sachets of damp-collecting crystals that can prevent issues before they arise. Okay, moths. It seems like our British grandparents and great-grandparents weren't only at war with fascism. Judging by the amount of text dedicated to the issue, it seems as though their other main enemy was moths. Between September and spring, clothes are at their biggest risk of moth damage. Moths like warm, dark cupboards to lay their eggs in. They hate movement and sunlight, so once a month at least, shake out your woolen clothes and then air them in the sunlight for a while if possible. The sun and air should kill the grubs. So check behind collars and in turn-ups and turn out the pockets to check for eggs. Eggs are about the size of a pinhead, and then the grubs can be up to 1/4 of an inch and are a yellowy white colour. If there are signs, brush the area vigorously and then iron with a hot iron over a damp cloth. I guess that now we have steam irons, wafting the area with the steam of your iron would be safer for woolen fabric than making actual contact. And for the longevity of tea towels, allow dishes to drain rather than drying them up immediately to save the wear on your tea towels. Okay, last section. Stains and laundering. Right. Remove stains as soon as you can. The longer you leave them, the more likely they are to set in and become more difficult to remove or even become permanent. I don't know if this is too obvious to mention, but always wash items of the same colour together. It can be tempting to chuck stuff in together just to get it done, but it makes sense to wait until you have enough items of the same colour before laundering, rather than risking a black sock and white t-shirt situation. Check the pockets before washing your clothes in case of tissues, bits of paper, or any items that may damage your washing machine. If at all possible, take clothes out of the machine as soon as possible and shake them out to prevent creasing. I feel that this is basically an essential tactic if you want to avoid having to iron your clothes and you don't want to look like you've slept in them. For most stains that aren't greasy ones, apply tepid water first and then add a little soap and water. I've also read elsewhere that protein-based stains, so blood, baby poo and so on, use cold water as heat can set them. Never hang wool or silk clothes, whether wet or dry. When dry, store them folded in a drawer. And when wet, shake them out gently to remove any wrinkles, then lay them out to dry on a flat surface in the open air if possible. So what do you think? Was there anything you took away from either the broader themes or the practical tips that resonated with you? Or is anything making you consider how you think about, plan, make or care for your garments? Did you have any different takeaways from this topic? I'd really love to hear, so please get in touch. Thanks so much for listening. I really hope you enjoyed this episode and are left feeling inspired. For more info about the podcast, including show notes for this and every episode, head to checkyourthread.com. I'd love to hear from you, so if you have any comments, questions or ideas for future episodes, please get in touch by emailing zoe@checkyourthread.com or find me on Instagram @checkyourthread. Massive thanks to Patrick Potter for production support, to Sylvia Seller for the awesome logo design, and to Simon at Palm Skin Productions for the music. This ad-free podcast would not be possible without listener support, so if you feel you are able, please consider signing up to the Check Your Thread Patreon. For the equivalent of buying me a coffee each month, you'll be making it possible to continue producing regular episodes. Links can be found in the show notes and on the website checkyourthread.com. I hope you'll listen again next week. Until then, take care. Bye!